So USBBY focuses on books as bridges to understanding and means of promoting and the mission is to promote international understanding through books, which is a mission I feel like we need now even more than ever. So tonight we're going to hear about books from Ukraine or about Ukraine, those that unveil hidden history like The Lost Year, issues of war like Yellow Butterfly, War That Changed Rondo, and those from Ukrainian creators like Happy Sliding Cup and Yellow Butterfly. And so we're going to learn more about that. One of my favorite things about USBBY is this is a group that's not just librarians. I'm a librarian by myself, but we interact with teachers and academics and publishers in USBBY, and I love those connections and different perspectives. So our panel tonight has some of those different perspectives. We'll hear Catherine Marsh, the Edgar Award-winning author of The Night Tourist, Nowhere Boy, The Twilight Prisoner, Jet Who Defied the Stars, The Doors by the Staircase, and the National Book Award finalist, The Lost Year. Also announced this week, the winner of the Jane Addams Children's Book Award. Catherine grew up in New York and now lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and 2 children. Emily Robert Wong is Associate Editor at Enchanted Lion Books, publisher of How War Changed Rondo by Romana Romanishin and Andre Lesive, which was one of the outstanding international books a couple of years ago. That book was published though in Ukraine in 2015, so it was published in response to the 2014 Russian actions, not currently, so it's just an interesting note. Emily is multilingual and translates for Enchanted Lion Books, so I'm really glad she's here to share that perspective with us. Anastasia Ulanovitz is Associate Professor of English at the University of Florida, where she is also an affiliate faculty member at the University of Florida Center for European Studies. She's currently working with Dr. Mateusz Swidlecki from the University of Wrocław, Poland, on the first Anglophone introduction to Ukrainian children's literature. She's also writing a book on representations of Eastern Europe in Western comics. Anastasia grew up in the Ukrainian community right here in Baltimore. So it's nice to have her back home tonight. And Angus Ewan Gillick is the founder and publisher of Red Comic Press, an independent children's publishing company based in Brooklyn, New York. With a focus on illustrated books, the press publishes storytellers from around the world. He has lived in the UK and Italy and has previously held roles in the children's divisions of Penguin, Hyperion, and Macmillan. He has served on the boards of multiple children's literature organizations and is a current board member of USBBY. Angus also serves on the board of an independent school serving children with learning disabilities. So I'm excited to have our panel talk and share their perspectives tonight. And we are going to get started with Catherine, and I will pull up the slides here. Sorry. Okay. We're going to learn about The Lost Year. You can stand, whatever you want.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Robin, and everyone else here tonight to welcome us here to talk about books on Ukraine. I am very delighted to tell you a little bit about The Lost Year, which has had a fabulous reception this year. I've been so thrilled. When I wrote this book, I actually finished it before the big Russian invasion in February of 22, and I was really worried that no one would even know where Ukraine was. And unfortunately, we all know a lot more about Ukraine, but there's still so much more to learn. So thank you for coming tonight. I just want to tell you a little bit about the story of The Lost Year. This is me. and my grandma. And it was funny, I was just talking to Angus, he was saying one of his sons lives with his grandma in her apartment. And I grew up with my grandma in her house when I was 5 years old. My parents moved in with her, and I'm an only child. And so my grandma became my best friend, my sibling, my buddy. She had the room with the biggest TV, and she watched the trashiest shows, and she had lots of candy squirreled away in her room. So we were real thick as thieves, the two of us. And my grandma was born in Ukraine. So she was actually, sorry, let me get that. See if that works. There we go. This is a picture of her. She was born in either 1906 or 7, and when she was about 21, we're never exactly sure of her birth date, but she was in a small village, and she decided to come to America, where her brother had come years earlier, after her mother died, and her father had died when she was 5, so she really decided to start a new life for herself, and it was a difficult trip. And there she is there's a picture of her in America, and I love the difference between these two photos, and they're only a few years apart. But she had a really hard time getting here. She had to leave Ukraine, and because in 1924 there is an immigration laws change in this country that really lowered the number of immigrants and completely excluded immigrants from Asia, and it limited the number of immigrants from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe who were considered less desirable than Western Europeans. So she had to go to Mexico. From Mexico, she went to New Orleans. She got thrown out of New Orleans. They said no entry. She went to Cuba. And in Cuba, her brother arranged a paper marriage that allowed her to move to Chicago, where he was living, and she spent a year there and then moved to New York. But when I knew her, and when I was a child, I remember all these airmail letters coming all the time. And she left behind her 2 sisters. And this is a picture of them and their 3 daughters. And it was taken in the 1930s, and I used to stare at it when I was a little girl and just look at them. And they were fairly young. The women were in their late 20s in this picture. They had children actually starting at 16. And they looked so old and tired and just unhappy. And I remember looking at it and thinking, why do they look so different? What's in their eyes? And what it was, as I found out, as my grandma told me and other members of her community, was there is a famine, which is the subject of my book, known in Ukrainian as Holodomor. It's death by hunger is the meaning. An estimated 4 million Ukrainians died of starvation in this famine. It was a man-made famine in 1932-33. There's a lot of scholarship around those numbers, and I'm using the ones that are often used in academic circles right now. But this included men, women, children, also in the North Caucasus, and forgive my spelling error there, that should be S-U-S, in Kazakhstan. And this was a famine that was created by Stalin. The people who survived ate tree bark, grass, rotten potatoes, and even animals. And the story I remember hearing when I was quite young was from my grandmother's cousin, this woman, her name was Nastya, and she would tell about how in wintertime the village was absolutely silent, and you couldn't even hear dogs or cats or horses or chickens because people had eaten every single animal. And so I grew up knowing about this, but it seemed like no one else had ever heard of this famine. And I wrote The Lost Year because I wanted to explore why. And I decided, how am I going to make this accessible for kids? And I'm a parent, I have 2 kids, and they like video games. So I started to think about one of those video games, which is The Legends of Zelda. And in this video game, there's a character named Link who has to regain lost memories. And I thought, wow, that's really kind of the project of this century. It's the project of all of us, to try to find these lost histories and lost stories. And so in my book, Matthew is stuck at home during the pandemic, with his mom and his great-grandmother, Gigi, who's 100 years old. And one day he gets in trouble and he has to help her unpack her boxes from the nursing home where she's moved after COVID has started. And he finds this photo. And this is what I imagine, although this is the photo of my mother's cousins, my grandmother's nieces. And he says, oh, like, what is this you? To his great-grandmother, she says, there were 3 of us. And she starts to cry. And Matthew realizes that there's a story here, a history that he has to uncover. So this is my book. It's about 3 cousins, about one single family who are divided by history. Not unlike mine, but with some differences. There is Nadia, who is like my grandmother, lives in a small village in Ukraine. There's Mila, who is the daughter of a Communist Party official, and I'll tell you what inspired her. And she lives in Kyiv. And there's Helen, who, like my mother, grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, and her parent, she has one parent who's a Ukrainian immigrant and one parent who's a Belarusian immigrant, which is what my mother's family background was. So Mila, I'm not giving anything away for anyone who hasn't read the book, is the missing cousin. Something terrible happened to her. You'll have to read the book to find out what it is, but it's a story that connects all of this. My grandmother's family, my mother's experience, and that's a picture of her in East New York, and my own personal experience. And when I was 15 years old, I had the chance to go on an exchange program at the top communist youth camp. And I am that old because it was during the Soviet Union in Crimea. It's called Artek. And it is the young pioneers who were the Soviet youth group, the elite who went there. And so I very much used that experience to inform the character of Mila, who's the daughter of a Ukrainian Communist Party official. So all of those experiences went into this to tell the story about this man-made famine created by Stalin. And these, I'm not going to go into all this because I don't want to take up too much time, but these are some of the historical pieces that I put together in the book. I also wanted to write about the use of disinformation and propaganda, and especially us versus them thinking during this time when Stalin was attacking all of the Ukrainian farmers, the kulaks. And these are propaganda posters, and of course he's posing with children, and it says there in Russian, "Thank you, our favorite Stalin, our wonderful Stalin, for our happy childhood." And these shaped a lot of how people thought. And I feel like we live in a time of us versus them thinking, so I also wanted to sort of have us reflect upon that. I was interested in media literacy. This is a tale where some of the disinformation about the propaganda about the Holodomor, the famine, comes from Western reporters, including a famous New York Times reporter who got the story wrong. And I'm a journalist, and I wanted kids to be thinking about that. And then finally, and I'll end on this, is current events. As I said, I finished this story before the massive Russian invasion. However, my illustrator who did the cover is from Kharkiv, and she got the assignment and started working on the cover and then had to evacuate from Kharkiv and do this from Poltava, another city further west. But there's, as you know, when I finished the book, I realized how much this chapter of Ukrainian history, this lost, suppressed chapter, is being reflected in current events, and there's so many parallels. And the two I'll just quickly point out is Russia's, you know, these are two news stories, but using food as a political weapon in terms of banning grain exports from Ukraine, and also the use of propaganda, particularly directed at young people in Russia today. So these are things that have historical roots in the experience of the Holodomor. So I will just end on one quick slide, which is that the hardest parallel for me about this story is, you know, obviously what's going on in Ukraine today. My grandmother sending all those airmail letters year after year after year for 70 years to her family. And now, of course, I do that with my family, with our relatives there as still. Obviously, they're not letters, they're WhatsApp messages, but that concern is still, and that worry is still very much part of my life. So, thank you.
I was going to go to Emily, if that's okay, and we'll do a little time travel here. If I can. I'm old enough that I like to use a mouse.
Just a quick note while we make this change that Catherine Marsh is signing tomorrow at 10 a.m. in McMillan booth 825. So please stop by and get a copy of the lost year.
So the right one is on the screen. Okay. Technology. Let's see, how about the next one that works? And maybe it's that I have too many things open. Thank you. My apologies.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. It's good to be back in my hometown. I grew up just about a mile or two away from here in East Baltimore. And like Catherine, I grew up with my grandmother as well. She also had the best candies and the biggest TV with the trashy shows. I love these little connections. So right now I am working on a book with my colleague Mateusz Świetlicki from the University of Wrocław in Poland on a collection of essays about the history of Ukrainian children's literature. And one of the reasons why we decided to do this is because after the full-scale war began, people started coming up to us, colleagues, librarians, parents, saying, what can you tell us about Ukrainian children's literature? What can you tell us about Ukrainian history? And we realized that nothing had really been concretely written in English, and so we wanted to create this book that would reach scholars and lay readers alike to give them some sort of background about Ukrainian culture and history, and specifically the role that children's literature has played in it. Today I'll give sort of a very brief tour of some of the ending chapters of this book, and which hasn't been published yet, but fingers crossed within the next year, about some contemporary trends in Ukrainian children's literature. And then I'll go in very briefly about some books that have been written in English about Ukrainian history and Ukrainian culture that might be of interest and available to people here. So I would start off by saying that immediately after Ukraine declared its independence in 1991, one of the first commitments made by the Ukrainian people and also the Ukrainian government was to fund publishing and children's literature specifically. And it was very important that there would be strong presses that would publish books for children, because for the longest time, children had only been given books in Russian language. They were beautiful books, but they were written in Russian. Very few books were actually published in Ukrainian. There were some, but not that very many. And so it was important to establish presses. So for example, like Old Lion Press, which I think recently won an award for the best press in Europe, that would reach children. And also, after these presses were established, there have been lots of archives that have been dedicated to Ukrainian children's literature, lots of social media sites. So children's literature is really a prized commitment among Ukrainians, partly because it's important for them to reach their children who were for so long denied their own language and their own culture. poetry immediately became one of the most important publications or topics of publication in children's literature. So on the left is this little book of poetry called About a Whale by Oksana Lushevska, who is a children's writer and also a translator. She's translated a number of Ukrainian children's books into English, including I think one of them that you'll be hearing about a little bit later on. And then the one on the right is a compendium of Ukrainian children's verses. And one of the reasons why poetry is so important for to be published, and one of the reasons why poetry was one of the first forms to be published in Ukraine, is because children's poetry is so much about language and the play of language. And for children who had been denied their language, who could only speak their language at home, who were often could only speak Russian outside in public, it was important to bring to attention the beauty of language, the playfulness of language, and also because poetry and verse is so memorable that we grow up and we might not remember what we ate for breakfast the day before or what we're supposed to do an hour from now, but we can recite from heart perhaps poems and songs that we were taught as children. And so poetry grows with us and stays with us. And so there was an investment in this form of literature for children because it would be a form that children could grow with. Also, folk and fairy tales were important. So some of the first books that were published were collections of fairy tales or folk tales, and also fairy tales that were invented. So on the very left is a collection of 100 folk tales that are illustrated by various children's illustrators from throughout Ukraine. Gorgeous illustrations. I don't think that this has been translated yet. Immediately after that is a story that's called the Story of Maidan, or Kaska Pro Maidan, and it is a fairy tale that is set at Christmas right during the Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity in 2013 and 2014. After that, also there have been some folk tales and fairy tales that might be familiar to you. So for example, the mitten, about the mitten in which little creatures live in, and there have been many versions of that folk tale that have been published in the US and the UK, and also one of the earliest award winners in Ukraine itself was the mitten. This is well-known. And then also, some of you might be familiar with the Snow Queen, which is actually a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale that was illustrated in Ukraine. It was one of the early award winners, and it's given more of a sort of a Slavic flavor, a Ukrainian flavor, and it's also been translated into English. However, just as it's important for publishers to publish fairy tales, it's also important for them to publish books that reach Ukrainian children in their everyday contemporary environments and that speak to their history in ways that books weren't able to before 1991. So some of the first YA middle grade books have been, for example, How I Ruined the Empire by Zirka Metzenyuk, which is about a girl who grows up at the very end of the Soviet Union and starts sensing a change in the air, starts becoming more politically active, and also is frustrated by her parents' political inaction without recognizing how difficult it was for them to be active at this period of history. And so there's a really, there's an attempt now to look back, especially at this recent history, and introduce it to children who grew up after independence, whose parents perhaps had a very different reality. Another book is Helena Malik's Criminals from the Parallel World, about a boy who grows up in north central Ukraine, and he travels into a parallel world which is very much like Chernobyl and Pripyat, the place where the Chernobyl disaster took place. And as he travels back and forth, this is a work of fantasy or magical realism. The book comments on the dystopian reality that was people's reality during the Soviet Union, and the differences between, and also the parallels between that reality and the present day reality, especially with concern to some degree of political manipulations that still occur. Another thing that's important for children's publishers now are books, global works of literature that are translated into Ukrainian. So for example, the Harry Potter books, or the Hunger Games books, and other recent books that have been published that children young adults immediately want to read. They know that children all around the world are reading it and they want to get their hands on it. And often, until very, very recently, the first translations that they could get their hands on were the Russian translations. And then sometimes, maybe months and months afterwards, a Ukrainian translation would pop up, but by that point, everybody had already read it in Russian. So one of the priorities of publishers now is to find translators for popular works of global fiction that will immediately reach Ukrainian children in their first language rather than in Russian. And especially in the past few years, this has become an immediate priority. So translation has become very important. And then also, on the other side, translation of Ukrainian books into English and other global languages has become very important. One of the things that I've been arguing perhaps for the past year is that especially Ukrainian picture books are Ukraine's cultural ambassadors. Even though Ukraine has a very rich cultural heritage, a wonderful heritage in high literature and drama and conceptual art, a lot of this really isn't accessible to everyday people, but picture books are. And picture books are not threatening, they're fun to read, they're easy to read. Some of them, for example, Yellow Butterfly, don't have words at all, and so they're very accessible for audiences all around the world. And for that reason, these picture books, especially since they've been winning awards at IBBY and other major book festivals, have become more accessible in translation to people around the world, and they can see in this way how rich Ukrainian culture and literary heritage these books are. So on the left, for example, is Rosto Parku, or Who Grows in the Park, which is a lovely book on the variation of Are You My Mother, but instead of animals, it involves plants. And it's a book about diversity, biodiversity, and also the diversity, in some ways it's an allegory of the diversity of people in Ukraine itself. And then also Stars and Poppy Seeds is another popular book that has been translated into English and also in French and other global languages, which is really a gorgeous art book about a girl who wants to be an astronomer, and might be addressed a little bit later on. One of the books that I think is one of the strongest cultural ambassadors is a book called Maya and Her Friends. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this book. It was just recently translated into English, but it's about a little girl named Maya, and in the course of the book, she introduces each of the 22 people in her 5th grade class, and each of these children comes from a different background. So one girl is from Belarus, and she's just moved to Kyiv, where the story takes place, and she lives with her father, who's a widower. Some other classmates are twins who are conceived by IVF. Another person is a boy who comes from a Roma family, another person who's a Crimean Tatar. Maya, for her part, lives with her 2 mums. The actual original title for the book was Maya and Her Mums. And so in this way, the book shows how people from Ukraine come from all kinds of different ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, and also have different kinds of families. So some people have parents and step-parents, some people have 2 mums or 2 dads, some people were conceived in different ways, some people were adopted. And so it shows kind of a range of family arrangements. And I think in some ways this book wants to show how Ukraine is much more of a modern, progressive culture and country than many people imagine it to be, and much more ethnically diverse than people imagine it to be. Finally, bilingual books are very important. So Oksana Lukshevska, whom I mentioned earlier, who's a great translator and poet, has also started a Kickstarter campaign in which she's creating bilingual books for children that are both in English and Ukrainian, and these books are being sold and circulated so that Ukrainian children can learn English and English-speaking children can learn Ukrainian, and they can compare the different words. It's structured in such a way that certain words are repeated and they're paralleled by images, so you can compare the words and the images and learn vocabulary in that way. And the grammar is very basic, but at the same time, it's a good way of introducing grammar in both languages, and also being able to cheat and go back to the language with which you're more familiar, so you can kind of understand what's going on in the other language. And there have been other campaigns. UNESCO now is funding translation, so it might be important to think, especially as librarians, about what kind of projects are being funded and where these books might be accessible. I want to close very briefly with some books that have been written in English in North America about Ukrainian history. I purposefully left out last year because I know that there would be a presentation on it, but it's just absolutely fabulous. And another great author on Ukrainian historical themes is Marshall Forchuk-Sklopuk, who's a Canadian of Ukrainian heritage and who's written a great number of books about Ukrainian history. So most of these books are middle grade novels, and the most recent one is called Winter Kill. It's also about the famine, and it's set during the Great Famine, and it's about a boy who lives in Ukraine and makes friends with a girl who's of Ukrainian heritage, but she's a Canadian, and she comes in as part of the youth campaign to further communism, and what she realizes is that what has been propagated in propaganda, especially in the West, is not the actual reality, and she and the boy have to negotiate what's happening during the famine. She's also written Don't Tell the Enemy, which is about the Soviet and Nazi occupation of Ukraine. One of her major themes is how Ukrainians were poised right between the Nazis and the Soviets, and both of these major totalitarian states were incredibly violent and both victimized Ukrainians in a way that often people had to choose sides in ways that were very compromising and very difficult for them. She also wrote Stolen Girl, about the Lebensborn program, in which Ukrainian children were kidnapped and resettled in Germany. These were blonde-haired, blue-eyed children. So essentially, these are stolen children. This is now happening again in Ukraine, where Ukrainian children are being rehomed by Russians and taken out of cities like Mariupol and resettled in part of Russian, and being told that they're in their new homes now and spoken to in Russia and taken away from their parents. So in some ways, just like Catherine's book, these books are really, really contemporary, or addressing contemporary issues. Enough, which is a picture book about the famine, probably one of my favorite picture books in the world. It's illustrated by Michael Marchenko, who illustrated The Paperback Princess, and he was also Ukrainian Canadian. And then Silver Threads, a picture book that alludes to the internment of Ukrainians in World War I era Canada. We know about internment of people in World War II, but Ukrainians were especially interned during the First World War because they were suspected of being German agents. Some brief books about Ukrainian immigrants. One of them is Broko's Amazing Journey, which is actually a sequel of a book about a boy who comes to Canada from Ukraine. And in this book, his dog that he had to leave behind tries to find him, and he walks all through Europe and then is able to get into a boat and cross over into Canada and is magically reunited with this boy. And the book gives some background historical information about the immigration process from the perspective of this lovely dog. And then another book with which you might be familiar is William Kurelik's A Prairie Boy's Winter. He's an absolutely beautiful artist, and his books for children about his own youth on the prairie, his summers and his winters, give a great insight into life on the prairies, but also Ukrainian culture and diaspora. And he also was the illustrator for Fox Makita, which is based on the stories of Ivan Franko, a great Ukrainian author who told animal stories and animal fables. And Fox Makita is sort of like Fabulous Mr. Fox. He's a trickster character and with a Ukrainian accent. And Kurelik's illustrations of these are really quite lovely. So this should give you some indication of really the rich diversity of books that have been published in Ukraine and then also in North America about Ukraine. I'll be very happy to answer any questions later on. Again, it was really a delight to speak with you.
Oh,
Does that mean I'm next? Oh. No. False alarm.
Not sure. Yeah, it is, sorry. Yes, Angus, let's go next with you next. And, yeah, and then we will only have one thing to figure out. My screen
so that's Red Comic Press, and that's me. And I founded the press in 2020 during COVID lockdown. So I don't know what was going on in my mind at that time, but I am 5 seasons in and really delighted to be here to talk to you about a couple of the books that we have published. As Anastasia mentioned, there is a publisher called the Old Line Publishing House in Ukraine, and they are an excellent independent publisher. And I know Emily knows them as well. We have brought books in from that publishing house to the US, and we're very proud of the work that they've been doing. They do amazing work. But enough about me and them. Let's go to this guy, Alexander Shatokin. Can you hear? Is that better? Sorry. So as you can see, he is a young creator, illustrator, and author who has a fairly short career in picture books. But if you go to his Pinterest there, is it Pinterest? No, it's Instagram. I'm so useless at this. You'll see that he is very active and posts a lot. And he posts quite a lot of political images and comments. They come up in English, but he doesn't speak English. And I found that out because, first of all, we acquired a book from Old Line Publishing House called The Happiest Line Cub, which you saw on the cover of Bookbird, the current issue. And we were due to publish it in fall 20, let me see if I can get the chronology right, 22. Before we published this book that I'd fallen in love with, it's a common courtesy that the originating publisher, if they have another book by the same creator, they're going to give first refusal to the publisher who has already stepped in and started to publish that person. And so through my email from Ivan Fedeshko, who is the rights director at Old Line Publishing House, I received a PDF of his next book, and his next book was Yellow Butterfly. So I was just sat here thinking, wouldn't it be fun if I could find the email chain about this book? And what do you know? Usually I'm useless with this thing. But I discovered that on July 14th, I wrote to Ivan, "Hello, Ivan. I think we should do the Yellow Butterfly. It is such an important contribution to the conversation about the war in Ukraine from someone living through it. How can I not? My plan would be to get it out in January 23. That's a fast track." And it is. As Mary will know, in publishing, it takes, the gestation period is very long. And I actually threw it onto a list that doesn't exist at my distributor and published it in January, which is a month they don't do children's books in. I made them do it. What did it? Ivan wrote back, let me see, I found something else that I thought was really good. Now I can't find it. Just give me a second. Oh, "There are no words to express my admiration for your decision," he wrote, which I thought was really nice. This book arrived, and I took a look at it and instantly turned around and decided to publish it because of the reasons I just read out to you, because it's such an important publication, and because I really responded to the emotion in the book and the technique of illustration, the style of illustration. And if you haven't read the book yet, you'll know that you'll find out that it's 72 pages long, and it is wordless. And it starts out in black and white, and the protagonist is a young girl. And clearly she is in a war-torn place. And she falls down, and we're missing a lot of spreads here, so I just wanted to make this a quick review, but you can read the book, it's outside on the table. And when she opens her eyes from her fall, she sees a yellow butterfly, and the yellow butterfly obviously becomes a symbol carried out throughout the book. And this is something that I found very powerful. One of the spreads, every spread is powerful in this book. And as you read it through consecutively, you realize how the storytelling is actually incredibly sophisticated, although it feels like the book was just his emotions pouring out onto the page. And here you see the butterflies landing on this bomb, and you see, now it's open to interpretation, but it seems throughout the book there are a lot of butterflies that represent the beating heart of a character, and here you see it in the cat, and in the image of the cat up the tree. And then you see the butterflies are lifting the bomb out of the ground, and in its place comes this incredible fountain of butterflies, and then they form a character who is speaking to her. And ultimately the butterflies create wings for her. And what is one of the most incredible things about this book is that not only is it about war, which is a really heavy, serious subject, but it's also very much about hope. And in this illustration, I mean, you can see there's many layers to it, to lots of things to read. You know, the windows are yellow there, there's this sort of sun coming up from behind, and we have the introduction of the third color, which is blue. And the third color is significant because if you look at the panel on the right, blue and yellow are the colors of the Ukrainian flag. And the crane here becomes a symbol of hope. And the book ends with the people of Ukraine looking towards the future, and we all hope, you know, an end to the war that continues in the country right now. So I sort of paused a little bit on this. The Ukrainian book finishes like that, and that's it. And I thought, you know, in order for this to reach the largest audience possible, I think maybe we should have something to help people read wordless picture books. Now, I know we have, you know, wordless picture books that run the Caldecott, but still people have difficulty, you know, understanding how to read it and how to enter the book and how to read it with a child. So I decided to commission from Rachel Walker, who is in the room, thank you very much, these amazing sharing a wordless picture book, which basically gives all sorts of tips and ideas on how to approach the book. And then guiding the conversation is actually about how to talk to children about war and conflict and have a conversation about it. So I think it is a great way to deepen the experience of reading a wordless book, and can be applied to other books as well. The book received a lot of critical acclaim and continues to, and we're very proud of you know, things like The Marginalian making it a Best Picture Book of the Year, and Fuse #8, Betsy Bird made it a Best Wordless Picture Book, New York Times covered it. But I wanted to just take a moment to look at this review, which came in recently, and really, I don't know, it just affected me. Because this review is by a parent who picked her top 3 books, Lera Burlakova. And she says, my 5-year-old has read a lot of books about war. Wait a minute, 5-year-old? I didn't think this book was for a 5-year-old. Fine. I'm really excited that she shared it with her 5-year-old. From those that tell stories of heroic little planes in verse form to those who, in the form of children's war diaries, both real and fictional, some were good and some were not so much. This book was the only one that gave us both unlimited topics to discuss on every page, to consider every aspect of war, and to share exactly what we both think without leading us. It's great. So, you know, I'm happy with that, but then I researched who is this woman who wrote this, and her name is Valeria Burlakova, and she is Democracy Fellow at CEPO, which is the Center for European Policy, I don't remember what the A stands for now, in Washington, D.C. She's a Ukrainian journalist and former frontline soldier who fought the Russians from 2014 to 2017. Her war diary, little PS, received the UN Women in Arts Award in 2021. She's worked as a journalist in Ukraine since 2008. I don't know if that really, the fact that this book reached her and resonated with her in this way, and her 5-year-old child, really, means a lot to me that we're able to participate in the conversation. The other thing you should know is that Alexander is not all about serious books. And indeed, the Happiest Lion Cub is the other side of his humor, his beautiful storytelling. It's about a lion cub who's destined to be king, but all he wants to do is play jazz. And long story short, at the end of the book, he becomes the first musician king of the savannah. And then The Gift is the next book from him that's coming out in the fall, and it is a holiday book, but with an interesting twist and palette. And it's about a little hare who wakes up one morning and there is a package on the top of his house. And he wonders where this package is from, and he decides to go around and see if he can find who it was destined for, and asks all the forest friends, and no one claims it. And then ultimately he backs up into a dark black boot and red velvet. Oh, it's Father Christmas, and he's dropped all his packages off the sleigh, and little hare comes along to save the day. So yeah, isn't it great that we can bring in books that are incredibly serious and important, as well as showing the other side of people's personality and the humor of Alexander Shatokhin. And I think I'll end with that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
We're gonna find out. Very talented. Okay, they have hung up my computer, yes. Because you all can see them, but I cannot see them on the screen here, so which is why I can't see too close, but, actually changed the slides. Oh, okay, let's go to the beginning. All right. Okay, all right. This works. It just uses these two. Yeah. That's okay. Oh, actually, this does work. Here, you can use it. All right, hello everybody. My name is Emily Robert-Wong, and I'm an associate editor at Enchanted Lion Books. And tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about our book, How War Changed Rondo. So I will finally reveal to you the identity of these great people. This picture book was created by Romana Romanishin and Andrew Lesev, a Ukrainian husband and wife pair of artists who together formed Studio Grafka. In Romana's words, this is how the story came into being, all the way back in 2013. We had never actually planned to create a picture book for children about war, but reality in our country changed things. It all started with the Revolution of Dignity at the end of 2013, then the annexation of Crimea in March 2014, and military conflict in East Ukraine. The war had started. Suddenly, there were thousands of victims and broken lives. At that moment, we were all unprepared and vulnerable, but determined. Many of our friends were mobilized for military service. We couldn't stay calm, and we knew we had to react in some way. Often, parents don't know how to explain to their children what war is and why it has come to their homes. And so we decided to create a picture book, which could be the starting point for an open conversation between children and their parents about what is going on. As authors and as artists, we felt that we should be honest and base the story on our own experience. So Romana and Andre drew inspiration from a greenhouse in their hometown of Lviv to create the airy, open, and nurturing town of Rondo, or at least Rondo before war comes to town, a place so idyllic that it's famous for its singing flowers.
To come up with their three main characters, Romana and Andre examined their own emotional state as the war broke out. Feeling fragile and vulnerable, they chose to make the story's heroes consist of a glass light bulb, a balloon animal, and a folded paper map, all easy to hurt, yet resilient in their own way. And so this moment that you see here, when the three friends are trying to beat back war by kind of throwing rocks and stones, beat it at its own game, this was inspired by the protesters who threw stones at armed forces in the Maidan protest of February 2014. And then this is the last moment that I'll share with you that is inspired by their lived experience. They were very inspired by these satellite images from Google Maps, and they wanted to show how landscapes changed between before, during, and after the conflict. So while How War Changed Rondo started from Romana and Andre's very personal experiences with war, as Andre says, this book is not about war in Ukraine, it is about war as a common disease of the world. It tells children how important it is to not be afraid, to be strong, to stay together with your friends and your people, and to keep hope. And so now I'd like to highlight some of the different ways that this story uses the picture book as a medium to tell a tale of war, hope, and resilience. All right, so I'm gonna try to make this a little bit interactive. So this is before war comes to Rondo. So take a quick look at the color palette, the different feelings that it's evoking in you. Maybe a couple of volunteers could share what they think about this town just based on these images. Yep. Joy. Bubbly. Vibrant. Growth. Light. So those are all great adjectives that kind of come through just through the art and through the different text design that they chose. And then war comes to town. So what are we noticing here? Darkness. Chaos, severity. And this is another one, after war comes to town.
There are also the diagonals are changing. It's kind of disrupting.
Exactly. Disorienting, disruptive. And so the reason why Romana and Andre made these choices was to kind of communicate that same experience that they felt when war had arrived in their home. It's intentionally creating a feeling of darkness, as we talked about, unease, and it's uncomfortable to read in a way that the same way that war makes life confusing and difficult. War here is faceless, it is shapeless, it is nameless, it is violent, and it is unflinching. It speaks with the language of force and hate and doesn't understand any other way of being in relationship. Nothing seems to be able to stop it until Donko, the little character here that's a light bulb, creates a small beam of light and he begins to sing with the flowers. And as more and more of the town joins in to the song, more light is produced and, for the first time, war retreats. While this all starts with one strong, courageous person who takes action and dares to hope, it takes the whole community working together to make a real change. And something that really resonated with us as a US-based publisher especially, and that we wanted to share with our readers here, is that Rondo does not go back completely to normal. Unlike many of the stories told here to children in the United States, it's not a fairy tale reversal with a magical happy ending, but rather an honest and an open one. There is real pain, there is real damage and real hurt, and these scars will remain forever. But there's also healing and togetherness and hope for a brighter future. And ultimately, that's why we decided to change the title from its original The War That Changed Rondo, which is how it was published in Ukrainian and many other languages, to How War Changed Rondo. Just because we really wanted to focus on the idea that it's not just about the war, it's about the change and about how Rondo can continue to exist beyond the war. We published the book in late 2021, many years after it had originally come out in Ukraine, and unfortunately in February of 2022, this story became sadly relevant once again as war burst out between Russia and Ukraine. And you can see a bunch of different great review quotes that we got numerous awards, including the USBBY OIB list of that year. But something that was really, really important to us is that as soon as the conflict broke out, we made the decision that we would be donating all proceeds from the book to UNICEF Ukraine relief efforts. And we just really believed in that because this is a book that was born out of the creators and their desire to share this story with people all around the world and to bring the story of war that touched them so personally. And so we thought, what better way to repay that and to be that beacon of light and to join forces and act as a collective than to donate to UNICEF in Ukraine. And then I will leave you with this one last also wonderful tidbit, is that we partnered with a publisher based in the UK to create these very, they're basically just folded and stapled paper print edition in bilingual English and Ukrainian of How War Changed Rondo. And these were actually distributed to thousands of refugee children in Ukraine, Poland, and the UK. So that's all for me. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit